Hi everyone. I'd like to read another piece from Idries Shah Remembered. This piece that I've chosen was written by a great family friend of ours called Richard Rieu. I've called it a very unusual situation. When Idries Shah arrived at Coombe Springs in the early 1960s, he found a community which had been very much insulated from the outside world. Many of the members of that community had been what we might call institutionalized. They were used to performing certain duties, movements, meditations, and so on. For anyone who lived there, it was normality. Turning it into the light, as one is able to do with the passage of time, I can see that to someone on the outside, it may have appeared as anything but normal. I remember a conversation with Shah when he first arrived there. I asked whether he was impressed with the setup and with the dedication that, in particular, the more seasoned members of the community gave to their way of living. Flinching, he strained to mask his feelings. I am a believer that everyone should have the opportunity to be free in their thoughts, he said, and to be the very best form of themselves possible. It is true that in certain communities in the history of humanity, rigidity has been called for. But in my feelings, in this case, the opposite is required. When J.G. Bennett handed over Coombe Springs to Shah, he altered everything. All of a sudden, the members of the community were required to cease from their routines and to think differently. It was around this time, when Shah was still very much a new face, that he announced a series of parties. They were really fantastically fun, with Afghan music, singing, and even belly dancing. Many years later, I asked him why he had decided to put on the parties. Each one of them was 3 days long. On hearing my question, Shah's expression dimmed. Tugging a handkerchief from his pocket, he removed his black-framed glasses and cleaned them for a moment or two, while no doubt pondering how to respond to my question. That was a very unusual situation, he said, one that called for an equally unusual remedy. I asked him how he had perceived the situation. Shah slipped the glasses back onto his face, folded the handkerchief once, then again, and put it away. When he was ready, he said, "At Coombe Springs, I found a group of people drawn together at a certain time and with certain commonalities of thought and behavior. They quite clearly shared a considerable interest in mysticism and what some of them had termed as enlightenment. At the same time, they were in a state of mind which prevented them from progressing. You've known me a long time, Richard, and you've seen me operate in all kinds of ways and attempt to solve some unwieldy problems and very tricky situations. And I think you will agree with me that holding parties, while not unknown, is not my customary way of behaving." I reminded Shah how several years before he had mentioned that the Afghan-born mystic Jalaluddin Rumi had encouraged a group of people in Konya, Turkey, to spin around and around the so-called whirling dervishes. Shah had stated categorically that this exercise was instituted by Rumi for this single group of people, and that his plan had not been for whirling to be appropriate for anyone else. When Shah heard my question, the corners of his mouth lifted slightly in a smile. I wouldn't say for a moment that the whirling dervishes of medieval Konya and the 3-day parties we held at Coombe Springs were similar in any way at all, he told me. But what I can say is that they were both specifically arranged to have an equally specific effect.